Hey everyone, and welcome back to Corbin AI, where we do daily artificial intelligence videos so you can start leveraging it in your personal or your business life. Now, this video is going to be fundamental if you ever want to do data input and start leveraging ChatGPT in this process and start leveraging automation in this process. Now, I challenge any viewer that's watching this right now to find a more comprehensive video that's going to be on this topic. The stuff I'm about to teach in this video, people could charge hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars. So you're about to learn very fundamental skills when it comes to data input and data output, and how to essentially take data in, use ChatGPT to itemize it, push it towards an Excel sheet. And what's great about this is we're gonna show you a simple process where essentially we add a file with relevant data and do it for one data input. And then I'm gonna show you a little trick where essentially if you have a huge data file and you have multiple data points to input, we're gonna show you how to do it automatically for multiple rows and really start streamlining your operations when it comes to your business. Inspiration for this video has to do with one of our viewers here named Jorge. We kind of got into a chat here essentially where he wanted to learn how to use Zapier to format ChatGPT outputs and push it towards a Google Sheet. Kind of got into a dialogue here. I went ahead and helped as best as I could with the limited amount of context I had, but that kind of inspired me to create today's video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's video and find out how to start leveraging ChatGPT with Google Sheets and Zapier. So to start off, we're going to use this as our sample data, but don't worry, any type of data that you have for your context, you'll be able to replicate the different operations and the different methods we use in today's tutorial. But for this example, we essentially have some fake data here for a potential client. Now, how this data got inputted could come from a various amount of aspects. One way that we do here at WebCafe AI is essentially if we get on a call, we'll have ChatGPT take the entire transcript of the call and then format the entire data from that call into an output like this. So we're going to go ahead and use this data here today, and we're going to go ahead and jump into our Google Drive here. So essentially, this is how we're going to set it up. We're going to set it up so when we get a piece of data, so this could be a PDF, whatever the context may be, for us, it's going to be a Google Doc. When a new piece of data is added to this specific folder, it's going to trigger the entire flow, and we're going to go ahead and push it towards this Google Sheet we created here, where it has the relevant data associated with that client's project, such as the client name, client description, project description, payment due date, and so on. So the way we kind of structure this is whatever is your fix Google Sheets that you currently have. So essentially whatever the relevant data that you have for your business that's put into a Google Sheet, you're going to learn how to essentially start taking ChatGPT and leveraging it so you never have to go through that labor intensive process where I have to kind of go here, copy and paste. No more, stop wasting time. Let's do it automatically now with AI. So we're going to go ahead and jump over to Zapier here. We're going to create a new flow here. And essentially we'll call this flow, data output automation. Now, sadly, I'm not going to be able to, actually, I'll be able to share in the description down below the simplified version where essentially we grab the doc and then it automatically outputs all the data into the Google Sheet. The more complex version, from my understanding, Zapier doesn't allow us to share zaps with loops, which will make more sense as we in this video. If it does, I'll include that in there. But let's go ahead and begin here. So essentially, we're going to set it up where we're going to have it, triggered when it is added to a Google Drive folder. So we're going to do Google Drive. And then we're going to go ahead and do an event of new file in folder. So this allows us to isolate it so no random files that maybe are added to your drive in the future get put into this flow. We're going to do our courses account here at WebCafe AI. Continue here. You don't have to choose your drive. We just have to choose our specific folder here. So I'm going to go ahead and find what I'm looking for here, which should be YouTube Zaps. And then we're going to go ahead and do data intake. All right, so now we have identified the folder we're dealing with here and continue. I'll test this trigger, and because we already have the Google Doc in there, it'll show up. So this is the data intake folder. And to create this and make sure you do it correctly, make sure you have sample data you can play around with. As you'll see, it'll become pretty fundamental to creating this entire flow here. So the next thing we need to do essentially is we're going to create a JavaScript block. And the reason we're creating a JavaScript block is because of the fact, not JavaScript, code by Zapier. We need to create this because essentially we're bringing in data that is not formatted for us to be able to read it. And what I mean by that essentially is, let's say, for example, that Google Doc that just got added. Okay, perfect. Let me read the contents in that Google Doc. Okay, looking. It's not going to show you. So the way Zapier does this, though, is they essentially do a thing called file exists but not shown. So we need it shown so we can actually start manipulating data. So we're going to do file text here, exists but not shown. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy over some code I have here. Okay, perfect. So I got the code copied over. Essentially, what this code does is we'll take the data here and it'll format it out so we can actually start manipulating it within the flow. It goes between 0 and 10,000 word count. Increase that if you have more data. From here, though, we're going to go ahead and make sure we input our variable, which is text. This is what's going to be manipulated. So we're going to input our variable. So our input data is this. We're going to continue here. Let's go ahead and test this step, and we should see an output. And there you go. As you see with this block here, we are able to get the entire output. And what I realized is I won't be able to share this. What I'll do is I will still share it, but I'll delete this block here. I'm not able to share the code blocks with Zapier yet. It's just not, it's not a capability. What I will do though is I'll leave in the description as well the code that I use here today, because I know it can be annoying typing this out one by one and just like pausing the video. So I'll make sure to share that in the description down below. If I don't, remind me. From here though, we have our underlying data that's associated with this output here. You know how to essentially extend it or, condense it depending on the 0 to 10,000 words there. Let's go ahead and add our ChatGPT block here. And this essentially is going to allow us to format the underlying data. Okay, so essentially we're going to use a conversation by ChatGPT. And we're going to choose your ChatGPT API key. If you have no clue what's going on here, you can check out one of our other videos. It's just like a beginner's guide where it shows you how to integrate AI into your flows. But from here, we're going to go ahead and upper model to GPT 3.5 16K. And the reason we're going to do that essentially is this is going to allow us to start handling more data. If we did 3.5 turbo, essentially it could still work. But if you have a ton of data that you're inputting into this flow, you're going to want 16K if, to give GPT the ability to read that much data that's occurring here. So we're going to go ahead and put in our prompt. We're going to say, we got information about a new project for a client. So we're going to add context. This is going to be the context of whatever you use for your operations when it comes to inputting the data for your Google Sheets. I don't know it because I'm not you. But for us in this example data, I'm going to go ahead and put our context, which is essentially we got information about a new project for a client. And then from here, we're going to say project, and we're going to do semicolon, parentheses. And this is going to provide our relevant data. So whatever your relevant data is, this is how you identify it and provide it so GPT can understand. I'm going to go ahead and put the results from that code block here. And we're going to go ahead and start with our next process here, which essentially is we're going to go ahead and ask it to output it and structure the data in a very specific way. So we're going to say from the information provided, please provide the following output. So from here, this is going to be however you have your Google Sheets structured here. Essentially, each one of these think of as its own data point. Therefore, we're going to have to find and extract the data associated with every single one of these columns in order to effectively do an automation where we can set it up, walk away, and never have to do data input for the rest of our lives, or maybe a little bit. I don't know. So essentially for us, though, as you saw, we got a ton of columns. So I'm going to go ahead and add one by one, essentially how I want each line. So I would do client. Go ahead and paste this in here. We'll do client name, client email, semicolon, client phone. So essentially all the data you want extracted, this is where you're going to do it. I'm going to go ahead and just do this on my end so you don't have to watch me type in every single one and then come back to it. Okay, so it's in. Essentially what we do then is once we identified what we want, which is the client name, and then we got the relevant information, this is going to essentially be like, okay, we're looking for relevant information that's in regards to the client name. Provide that for all relevant variables that you want. But on top of that, you can take it a little bit further here. So let's say you can actually go the extra mile here and also ask for, additional interpretation of the data. So we can say project status, choose between in progress, completed, on hold. And then finally for our notes here, we're going to say summarize the 3 main points. However it wants to interpret that, it can interpret that. You can add more context of maybe what the notes should look like. Maybe this should identify certain people on your team, so on and so forth. But that just shows you the ability to essentially put in not necessarily always fixed text or fixed variables you find in the data, but also allow GPT and you can train it to interpret the data and give you certain outputs. From here, though, we got to make sure that we provide a line here that says the entire output should have each data point on its own line. So let's go ahead and just run this. And what you'll know when you do automations and AI automation is sometimes you got to keep running the prompt to make sure it's correct here. We're going to say output test input. This is a random string of 32 characters. This ensures consistent outputs. What do you mean consistent outputs? Essentially, if you don't put that in there, you're playing Russian roulette in the sense of every single time it does an output, there may be a slight variation on how it looks, which could be really messy if you're doing stuff like this where you need the exact column, exact data point, and so on. So make sure you add a memory key. That's huge. But from here, let's go and check out this output. And this is our initial input here. And here is our output. So we got all of our relevant information. As you see, John Doe. We got the 3 main points. I gave it no context, but it just chose this to be the 3 main points. And we got project status. It shows in progress, and it shows all the relevant information here. And just so you can gut check me, if we come back over here, let's just check one data point, right? So we got the due date, December 20th, 2023. Come over here, December 20th, 2023. Start date, September 10th, 10/23. September 10th, 10/23. Perfect. Now, there is one thing here that I don't necessarily like, and that is going to be the fact that it outputs the client name with the client's name. So let's go ahead and see if we can reformat this and see if it's a quick reformat, or essentially say just output the relevant information, no text before or after. And we might be saying, why did you add those quotation marks? That makes it very clear to ChatGPT that I want just this specific data. Nothing before, nothing after. Let's see if this is good enough. I'm going to go ahead and keep we'll refresh the memory key, starting a clean slate there. Essentially, every time you do a new prompt, it is a good practice to refresh the memory key so it starts in a clean slate and it doesn't use previous outputs as contextual data. And there we go. So as you see here, we got exactly what we were looking for here. And this was the 3 main points. This is how it interpreted maybe the 3 main points here. But for the purposes of this tutorial, so I don't get lost and, when I'm inputting the data and inputs correctly, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this line. But now you know, for your reference, if you don't want to see the, the original names or as you'll see in the Google Sheet, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I'm going to go ahead and retest this step here. So I see that information. So when I'm inputting it into the next step here, it's very clear to me what is incurring here and I don't get lost. So I'm going to go ahead and go like that. All right, so let's see if this works. Okay, perfect, it works. All right, so from here, though, we're going to go ahead and put it into our Google Sheets. No, we're not. Essentially, we have to filter it, or format it. Because right now, what ChatGPT just did right there, and just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about, is we got the output. But the problem is that the output is not formatted how we want it to be formatted. It's one big data block. We have to split it up so we can grab and manipulate the underlying data we care about. So I'm going to use an event of split text, and don't use the beta. It doesn't work as good. So we're going to do split text here. We're going to do our input here of the ChatGPT reply. And then we're going to go ahead and do our separator here. Now, separators come in many shapes and forms. Sometimes you can manipulate the underlying output of a ChatGPT to add like a miscellaneous character where you want it to be separated. For this purpose, though, we can jump over to the docs found here at Zapier. And we're going to go ahead and separate each data point by a new line. Name, phone, so on and so forth. I'm going to put that here. And we're going to do a segment index. This is going to be what allows us, we're going to do all separate fields. This is going to allow us to separate into separate data points. We're going to hit continue here and then test this step. And there you go. So as you see here, every single one of these data points is a separate point. That is really cool, right? So now we go to our next step here, which is going to be adding it to our Google Sheet. To do this, it's actually really simple. A lot more simple than you would expect it to be. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to add complexity a little bit later, where we're going to show you how to do it if you have multiple data found within one file. But for now, though, we're going to go ahead and just say update spreadsheet row, hit continue, choose our account, which is going to be our courses account here, and we're going to hit continue again. If you feel like you learned something so far, make sure to like the video. It really helps us here at Corbin AI, and we'll be able to give you more content that is structured like this and for this purpose. It lets us know here that you like this kind of content rather than our other types of content. From here, though, we're going to do our spreadsheet, which is just going to be our data input sheets, which we showed earlier here. Our worksheet is going to be sheet 1, and that's a pretty cool thing to know. So obviously, if you have multiple spreadsheets, you'll be able to identify which specific spreadsheet you care about here. And then we're going to choose our row here, which is going to be row 2, obviously. And then we're going to go ahead and start inputting all of our relevant information. So for client name, if we went to our original route here of conversation by ChatGPT, that's going to be all that data. If I put more here, that's going to be all that information. We don't want all that. So that's the purpose of why we formatted this block. Because look at boom. And that's also the purpose why I left stuff like this in there, because I'm not familiar with this data. So I don't know exactly each one, right? So I'm going to go ahead and fill out every single one of these columns here. So one thing to make it easy, I can do this. I put email here and I come over here and I'm like, okay, which one had email? Okay, this one had email. Kind of proceed like that. I'm going to go ahead and fill every single one of these and then come back to you. Okay, so I'm finishing up here. We have basically everything we need here. I'm going to the last one here. I'm just putting notes. And then come down here. Here we go, notes. Oh, for notes, actually, we do need to add a little bit more context here. So because notes was set up like this, where essentially we do every single line, we're going to go ahead and have to grab the notes like this. So as you see, they have identified with, 1, 2, 3. So let's go ahead and grab 1, 2, 3. Now, I'm not sure if this can handle HTML, but I mean, it doesn't hurt to try to see if the formatting can be a little bit better here. So I'm going to try some HTML real quick and see if we can add just a couple of breaks here so it isn't just jumbled. I have no clue if it's able to interpret HTML on Google Sheets, but might as well try here. But we have all the relevant information. As you see, you might be asking yourself, what are those? Why are those in there? Essentially, for formatting reasons, I add little columns to separate maybe more important stuff. From here, though, we're going to go ahead and go back here, hit continue, and then let's test this step. And there you go. We got our output. So as you see here, we got all the relevant information. It doesn't look like it can interpret HTML, so let's keep that in mind. From here, though, essentially, obviously we need to maybe reformat a little bit so it's not as crazy. The reason that it's, big like this is because our notes is so big. From here, though, as you see, all the relevant information has been inputted. Now, the next question you might be asking is, okay, this is great. What happens if I have a file that has multiple data points? I'm going to show you how to do that as well, and this is going to be pretty complex here from here on out. But what I want to do, though, before we do that, is I'm going to delete this. I want to show you like what this looks like as an automation, right? So what I'm going to do essentially is I'm going to go ahead and publish this. I'm going to come back to my Google Drive here. Let's go ahead and put it back. Let's just move it out one to Zaps here, and it makes it so difficult. If you can just take me to YouTube Zaps, thank you. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we got our Google Sheet here. Let me just reload it so we can confirm. Okay, completely clear. We got our data here that we just grabbed out of there, and then this should be live. Okay, we are live. Okay, let me just show you what it would look like in just a simple context. We got our data in, maybe it was from a transcript, and then we essentially, formatted the transcript, and then from that transcript, we essentially formatted it into a doc like this. Now we're like, okay, we want to add to an Excel, put it in data intake, and then if we come back over here, this should trigger this flow here. If I go to history, I should see a Zap run here pretty soon. As a side note, if you ever run into an issue, you're like, wait, this should be triggered. Some of Zapier triggers are on a 5-minute basis, 15-minute basis. It doesn't always check instantly. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for it to check. That has to just do with API calls and AI usage and stuff of that context. Okay, so as you see, we got our automation showing up here. Now, I will admit 100%, essentially because of the fact that it maybe only checks every 5 minutes. I don't know the specific time, but I just do know that it's not instant in this context. So it's always going to be checking the folder like 5-10 minutes. This is just so they don't exceed API calls on their back end. But essentially, it does finally show up here. As you see, if I click into it, we got our data output automation, new file added, code, ChatGPT, and then if you come out here, you can hit data out so you can see the exact outputs of what it looks like here. Jump over to our Google Sheet, and boom, automatically done. I didn't have to lift a single finger other than press on. Okay, so now that we know how to do it for that specific context, which can be applied to a lot of different breaths, I'm going to show you real quickly a simple, not really simple, but it's a way to do this where essentially if you have a ton of data, you can go ahead and, use this method. So the next method here is we're going to have to essentially add a looping block. So what a looping block allows us to do is it allows us to run multiple automation flows within one automation flow. So that kind of sounds confusing, I know, but let me go ahead and walk you through it. So we're going to do create loop items or create loop from line items. And the line items we're going to be using here is going to be essentially when we use a Google Sheet, we're going to have to find the specific sheet rows we want to create this action for. So we're going to go ahead and do look up spreadsheet rows as line items. If I can speak today, I'm going to go ahead and delete this data here. I'm going to put in not any, because basically the way we pull up all the data associated with this column as a lookup spreadsheet row is we're going to have a piece of data that essentially tells you up to what point you want the data to be outputted. Now that might be a jumble of words, but it'll make sense when we get into this. So we're going to go ahead and do our courses account here, and we're going to do our spreadsheet, which is going to be data input sheets. We're going to do our worksheet, which is going to be sheet 1 for us. And we're going to do a lookup column, which should be the last column within your spreadsheet. And that's why we're saying the lookup value, why I added that and earlier is because there's not any notes right now, but we need to identify, this is how we identify every column before that and that column for data we want to input. We're I'm going to continue here, and then we're going to test this step, and then we should be able to get all the relevant columns. All right, perfect. So as you see here, we got all of our relevant columns, which is going to allow us to then come into this block here. And essentially, this is where it gets a little bit crazy. I'm not going to lie, but essentially, the way we would want to do this is we're going to go ahead and have it so that the ChatGPT outputs could be run multiple times. So the way I would do this, it really comes to your data, and this is going to be very complex. So use at your discretion. The way I would do it personally is I would do some type of numerical identification of understanding what the individual is. So the first thing we need to do though is we're going to go ahead and come to our drag here. We're going to drag this ChatGPT block. Yes, we're going to move this step. And essentially, we still want the data to be outputted, whatever data is relevant. And from here, though, let's go ahead and move this formatter block as well. So let me go ahead and move the formatter block to right there. Okay, so what we need to do here then is this is where it gets difficult. So it's really contextual. Because of the fact that the data I'm dealing with here is only one project, it's not going to be perfect. But assuming we have multiple projects, what I would do here is something along the lines of this. Plus project. And then we'd put like number. And the reason we're doing this is how we're going to identify what specific project each data point is associated with. And as you'll see in this loop, this is going to be fundamental so we don't loop data, basically overlap data looping. So hit this. I'm going to say for your output, you can assume we have multiple projects. Therefore, for each data point, please provide a number with the associated project. I'm going to do the same with e.g. project 1, and then we'll do an e.g. or let's do e.g. project 1. That might be enough of context here. So the first thing that I'm asking myself is, okay, so in this context, we should only see the output here with project 1 by. If we do see that, that tells me essentially this worked. If we don't, then we're gonna have to keep on formatting this. So see. Okay, so we don't see it here. Or do we see this? No, we do not see it here. Okay. In order to, oh wait, no, we do see it here. Okay. We can actually get away with this. All right, so we have project 1 up here. They want to add it by each data point, but we might actually be able to get away with this. Okay, so the way we would do this then, essentially it's identifying project 1 at the top, but it didn't do it by data point. But honestly, thank you, ChatGPT. That's actually a smarter way to probably approach this. So the way I would essentially do it from here then is our separator would be by project. And essentially what this would do is this should give me the entire output and this entire output. Let's see if it does that. Okay, it did not do that because project is in there multiple times. We need to actually rename the variable we're putting here. So instead, let's actually do this. We essentially need a term that's in this that isn't repeated ever. So I'm actually just going to put XYZ, because there's no way that the term XYZ is going to be in our output, right? So we're going to retest this action. And then essentially we should see XYZ1 and then all the relevant information. So this part right here, you can kind of ignore. Let's go ahead and see. Okay, so it didn't interpret that. Let me go ahead and up this prompt again. Maybe it wants me to actually add it to every single one. Let's go ahead and see. Add a 1 there. I'm going to go ahead and retest this step here. Okay, so I know the issue. The issue essentially is that what I'm asking for makes sense, but for them it's like, or ChatGPT is just like, what does that even mean? What do you mean XYZ? Well, I have to basically maybe give an actual term that you wouldn't see in the actual document, but makes sense like English-wise. So let me go ahead and just do this again. I doubt that what I'm doing here is relevant. This part is relevant, but just for the purposes of testing, I'm going to keep that there. I'm going to go ahead and change our memory key back to 2. Okay, so I got it to work. Sometimes you just got to mess around with it a little bit. I realized sometimes you got to take it back, reset. Essentially what I had to do here is essentially put the overview up here because we want that on the output. We want that on the top every single time. And then essentially just identify, therefore, we should see, obviously identify whatever the context of whatever the multiple situations or multiple rows you're inputting, and then we say therefore the top we should see overview number, and then give examples 1, 2, 3, etc. So we got our numbers here. Now the next step here is now that we can call upon it based off the overview. Instead of project, we're going to do overview, and then from my understanding, overview shouldn't be in this data here. Let's go ahead and see. Okay, it's not. So perfect. So as you see here, it removes the overview, but we get the entire data block here. Now your next question might be just like, oh no, but we have one whole data block here. I mean, that just comes down to simply adding another formatter block here. And then essentially in this formatter block, we're going to do what we did earlier, but now we're going to do it where we just split the text for the specific project we're dealing with. And here is what's amazing of what just occurred there. Essentially, what you notice is the overview is gone, but the one stays. And that's going to allow us to really get away with this looping mechanism here. So we're going to do our input. This is going to be our input. We're going to do our separator, which is going to be, I'm not even going to go back to the documentation. It's just new line. And then new line here, segment index, all separate fields, continue, test this step here. And then we obviously will get our, different things here. But what's also great is we're going to get this line item here. That is going to be fundamental for what we're about to do here. So essentially we're going to our spreadsheet row here, and I need to delete all this. Let me just go ahead and delete all this. Recognize that we can't actually use HTML in Google Sheets, sadly. And I'm going to go ahead and just delete all this. Maybe it's because I didn't close the breaks. I might not have closed them. I'm not too sure. But we're going to delete all this. And then essentially, this is where the fun begins. Essentially, what we need to do here is, so this is going to go to row 2. And we're going to sheet 1. This is all good. This is all good. From here, we're going to go ahead and add our looping mechanism. That is why, well, let me go ahead and test this action real quick. It wants me to test it. This is where we're going to do our values for loops, essentially. The value that we want looped into this update spreadsheet row. So one thing we actually need to do here is, because of the fact I can't input the original values here, we're going to have to take a step back here. And essentially, we're going to have to set this up to be not as efficient. Oh, don't want that. Not as efficient as I would want it to be. But due to our circumstances, it looks like there's limitations to essentially all this. So one limitation, it looks like, essentially, is the way we have to approach this is we're going to have to set a fixed amount of data per row that we input. So what I mean by that essentially is, let's say you're going to input or upload a file that is a data file, and you have to upload 10 different rows of information. Then you're going to basically have to repeat this process, what I'm about to show you, 10 different times. So what that means essentially is this. As you see, we have our outputted information. In theory, every time we have a new data input, we're going to get another overview. And honestly, just because we might as well go the extra mile here, let me just go ahead and upload a data file that shows 2 different projects so I can just showcase what this truly looks like intuitively. All right, so to do so, I'm just going to come back over here. I'm going to paste this. Let's just change very limited variables here. Let's do James, so we just know it's different data. James, 23rd, stuff like that. Okay, so we got our 2 different pieces of information here, although it might confuse ChatGPT, but let's see if ChatGPT is smart enough to recognize the differentiation, that small differentiation essentially. So essentially from here though, I'm going to go ahead and grab this. I'm going to make sure, actually it doesn't even matter because we're just using it as test data. I'm going to put that data intake there. I'm going to go ahead and reset my original test input here. So I'm going to go ahead and say find new record. Let's go ahead and find that new record here, and it should show up. There we go. And then let's assume that it's just the most recent one. We're going to continue here, and I'm going to test this action for this again. Retest step. So we didn't get the correct one. Perfect. That's fantastic. Let me go ahead and see if I can find the actual correct one. So maybe it's file B, continue with selected record. Let's go and test this action again. The reason I knew it wasn't the correct one is because we didn't see James in there. We only got one output of John, which was our original data points. Okay, so this is the correct one. As you see, we got John Doe. Come down here, we got James Doe. Let's go ahead and continue this conversation. Let's go ahead and retest this step here. That's why having a 3.5 16K is so fundamental. It allows us to take large amounts of data here and output it. So we should see an output overview 1. And let's see if it was smart enough. All right, so we got an output of overview 1. Come over here, we got overview 2. So that works perfectly fine. Come over here, let's go ahead and retest the step. So we should get 2 different variable points. We should get 1 and 2. We got 1 here, we got 2 here, perfect. So we got 2 different projects. And then continue, we're gonna go ahead and continue this. And essentially what you'll notice is that this data point, if I'm using the correct one here, this should only be overview 1. Okay, perfect. And that is why I said you're going to do this however many rows. This is what you're going to have to do. Sadly, it doesn't look like Zapier has the ability to do multiple loops in the Zap currently. So we're going to do something like this. We're going to do project. So whatever your context may be. For me, it's project. So I'm going to do project 1. And then this would be the output here. Perfect output. I'm going to go ahead and just retest that just so we can confirm. And then essentially I'm going to have to duplicate this and do project 2 and kind of proceed with that route here. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to duplicate this. And for project 2, essentially we're going to put in that variable point that we just had there. So project 2, action, and we're going to go ahead and put in this run right here. Continue, retest this step, and then we should get the relevant information for project 2. Perfect. And then now we can go ahead and entertain the looper. So the looper is going to allow us to essentially, we got the underlying information. If you remember from this spreadsheet rows, we have all this information here. So what we can do now is we can use the looper in the context of pushing this data towards it. To do so, we're going to have to identify the underlying data points here, which is going to be our client name. And within client name, this is where we're going to put in our relevant information here. When we're dealing with a loop event like this, we need to provide the relevant information when it comes to what's being looped here. And due to the fact that that spreadsheet is huge, I'm just going to show you how to do it with client name. Obviously, in your context, you would do it for every single column. For us, though, we're going to go ahead and input our client name here. So we're going to do client name, comma, and then we'll do the next one for project 2. Come over here, client name. So we got our 2 client names here. From here, we're going to go ahead and hit continue, and we're going to test this step. So essentially, this is going to allow us to get the individual's names. Now, one thing I am missing here, which is actually pretty fundamental to make this work, is we need to give each one a unique identifier. And the unique identifier we're going to use is going to be the overview number that we had. So wine, client name, and then we're going to go ahead and add a space here. And then we're going to go ahead and add a 2 here. So we have a unique identifier for our second project. So essentially, what I'm about to show you, you can go ahead and replicate for your own needs. We're going to continue this. We'll retest this step. So as you see, we got a unique identifier for client 1. And we got a unique identifier for client 2. So we can't just go directly into here and input the variable of this because of the fact that we got both names. So we got to learn how to separate it. In order to separate it, we're going to do a couple of things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just do a ChatGPT block. We're going to do an event of conversation. We're going to do continue. We're going to say, based on this data point of a client's name, we have a string, semicolon or parentheses, and then we're going to go ahead and provide that string here. We need an output of just one of their names. Please choose. Actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and format it. This is going to make it a lot easier. So you have multiple lines. We're going to add a formatter block here. And we're going to essentially just do split text like we've always been doing here. So we're going to do text. And we'll do continue, and that is why, partly because of the fact I added that quotation, or sorry, the comma, is because that's going to be what we can use to split these texts. So this should be 2 separate lines here. Create loop here, put this in here, and then essentially that comma is the separator we're looking for here. We're going to go ahead and segment it by all separate fields. Continue, test this step here. There you go. So we have client name 2, client name 1. Now we have separated the individual's name. We need to do one last step here. I know, it's a lot. But this is going to get a little crazy, okay? So we're going to, based on this data point of the client's names, we're going to go ahead and do text formatter, client name, and then, we're just going to do a comma here as well. So we're going to do client name. All right, we're going to say generate, and then we see this loop right quick. Generate the client's name that is on this loop. What do you mean on this loop? I mean this. So loop iteration 1, and then essentially we can go ahead and actually proceed from here. It actually looks like maybe due to the fact, okay, so I missed one very important part of what it means to loop. Essentially, we need to provide the amount of times that it should loop and the amount of iterations. And one way to do this essentially is providing blank variables or blank fixed takes. So one way in this context would be adding a not available yet. And essentially this tells Zapier here to loop through it that many times. So in your context, you would basically set up however many data points that you want to input automatically in this data amount here. From here though, what that allows us to do essentially is if I retest this step, you'll see that it will loop through twice and essentially we'll get 2 iterations. And why that's important is that's going to be what allows us to essentially grab this underlying data for its specific use case. So this is going to make a lot more sense once we get into it. Based on the data points of the client's name, we have a string that, output 1, output 2, generate the client's name that is on this loop iteration 1. And then let's see if this is enough information for it to understand to choose John Doe. I'm gonna go ahead and up the model here to GPT-4, and let's go ahead and see if this works real quick. We'll do name grab, and we'll continue test this step here. All right, there you go. So we got the name here. It gives too much information that we're just gonna say generate just the name, no text, before or after. Now, to be completely transparent, I mean, I am making up this automation on the spot. This is just from my expertise and from my understanding, and we're doing this within an hour. So if I had more time to really play around, this would probably be a more efficient way to do this. But for now, I just wanted to show you, let's just do it, right? From here, though, essentially, we got our content of John Doe. Go to update our spreadsheet here. So this is going to be 2 pretty important stuff here. So the first important thing that's going to occur here is we're going to go ahead and just essentially put in the output here of John Doe. That's fine. And then essentially the next and most important thing is going to be this row. So we don't want to overlap on rows. So in order to ensure that we don't overlap on rows, this is where we're going to do a little bit more custom work, where essentially we're going to add another block here from ChatGPT. And essentially the way we would want to structure this block is to tell it based off whatever the underlying name is or the variable point, because we've identified by overview 1, overview 2 to add a +1. So we're going to say based on this number, we do semicolon and then parentheses, and we're going to go ahead and grab our number here, which is coming from, we say based on the number found here +1, generate just the number. This is probably blowing your mind if you haven't really done prompting a lot of ChatGPT. I mean, you could really make it do a bunch of crazy stuff. We're gonna do addition here. There's ways to go about it. I probably could have done JavaScript there, but sometimes you could kind of circumnavigate code by using ChatGPT and just prompting it, which is nice. And as you see here, we got an output of 2. And you might be asking yourself, why did you do that? And the reason I did that is because of the fact that essentially, well, first off, I did mess up. I need to actually make it so that it isn't just John Doe, it is actually the looper. So let me grab the looping real quick. And for this, we can actually simply just go with a simple addition of based on the number found here, which would be the loop iteration, 1 + 1, and generate the number. So essentially what this means in this context is, let me go ahead and retest this action here. Because of the fact that we have a fresh piece of data here, we know that row 2 is going to be on loop 1. We know that row 3 is going to be on loop 3 or loop 2. So we can do this. Essentially what this means is that on loop 2, it will come in here +1, now on row 3. So then we come over here, essentially we can go ahead and add the row, make it custom, and we can go ahead and do this conversation here. We're going to do a reply here, and we should be good to go. Okay, so that was a ton of information. Before I go to the next step here, let's go ahead and just skip this test, and I'm going to shoot this and make this live. I'm going to add that file, and let's see if it works. In theory, what should occur is we should get both names here, not in project budget, in both names here from this loop. Let's see if, in theory, this works. So I'm going to go ahead and take this back out, and I'm going to go ahead and work this around. If you ever wanted to see what a flow looked like, you can click into it and you can see it live. As you see here right now, it's going through the ChatGPT block. Let's go and see what it comes up with. So as you see with the looping function, we'll get 2 different flows occurring here. And the moment of truth, boom, there we go. We got our 2 names inputted automatically from the data we provided by simply dragging into that Google Doc. Now, this can get a lot more complex. This can get a lot more efficient. I just wanted to show you how to do it step by step, as I know this content doesn't even exist right now, and you probably learned a ton of stuff throughout this entire process showing you how you would do it in this specific context. Now, there is another way we could probably gotten a workaround here, so we would have had a additional looper. is the ability to create zaps within zaps. So a sub zap. I know, crazy, right? It's Inception. It's dream within a dream. But that could have been a useful use case in this context. We could have sent the information as a sub zap, pushed it out as a loop into this. But for now, this is pretty sufficient on showing you everything you need to know on a very ground level and a very advanced level when it comes to ChatGPT, Zapier automation, and starting to manipulate data automatically into your Google Sheets. Now, I'll be honest, this video went a little longer than I expected, but end of the day, you probably got a ton of value. So make sure to like the video. It's completely free, and it shows me here that essentially you want more value that's oriented on these type of topics. If you want daily artificial intelligence content, make sure to subscribe here, as that is what we're producing on a daily level. If you want to see more tutorials like this, I'm going to link one of our main playlists here found on this channel, where essentially we dive into all 5,000 apps on Zapier and show you essentially how to leverage every single one with AI. But without further ado, I'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for tuning in. And yes, surprise, I'm an AI avatar. Make sure to explore more here at Corbin AI, where we demystify AI for your personal and business life. Until next time.